Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm Jamie Jodry. I'm the chair of the Latornell Steering Committee and the manager of acquisition and conservation services at Ontario Heritage Trust. And on behalf of the steering committee, Conservation Ontario and the University of Guelph, I'd like to welcome you all to the Latornell Conservation Symposium's fall program called Reimagining Conservation. This webinar is the first in a series of events that will explore the changing ways that we think about, define, and practice conservation professionally and personally. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Toronto, where I'm located, is situated on treaty lands with rich Indigenous history and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. I'd like to acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples, from whom traditional territory I'm speaking to you today. I'd also like to acknowledge that you're all joining us from many different locations and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. So please take a moment to think about the history of the place that you're joining us from today, and feel free to share in the chat. We're privileged to partner with the Black Environmentalist Alliance on today's webinar, Reimagining Conservation with the Black Environmentalist Alliance. Today's webinar builds on our 2021 webinar, Taking Action, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Conservation, which you can watch on Latornell's YouTube channel if you missed it. Through our moderated discussion today, we'll spotlight and gain insight into the experiences of Black professionals working in the field of conservation. We'd like to ensure that this topic is presented in a safe space that allows us the opportunity to challenge how we think about conservation, the people who occupy or gatekeep the various roles, and to think about what we can do individually at our organizations and collectively to support the advancement of Black conservation professionals who are just entering the field or looking to advance in their current roles or into leadership positions and as thought leaders. And before I hand over the webinar to the Black Environmentalist Alliance, I'm just going to take a moment to review our opening poll results. Okay, so we've got most of the people here from the GTA and some from, actually quite a bit from Southwestern Ontario, and a good representation from Eastern Ontario as well. That's great. Hello, everyone. A lot of us are from conservation authorities and non-governmental organizations and some municipalities as well. That's great. Okay, so have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination or racism in your workplace? So actually a lot of people have witnessed, less have experienced, and some have done both. And quite a few actually also haven't experienced it. So I think hopefully this webinar will teach you quite a bit. Does your organization offer or fund any of the following diversity, equity, and inclusion workplace best practices? So training, yes. Implicit bias training, we have that at my organization as well. Some other types of training there, which I think they'll be speaking about more. Does your organization offer any of the following DEI engagement best practices for underrepresented communities? So some of them have targeted marketing and outreach, some targeted outreach, but a lot just did not answer the question. And I think this is the last one. Does your organization include any of the following DEI planning and evaluation best practices? Actually, wow, 33% have a strategy and action plan. That's good, but pretty light on the other evaluations. Okay. So that's it. I think we'll be hearing a lot more about these programs and things like that through this webinar. So it's now my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Shannon Carto from the Black Environmentalist Alliance. Shannon will be leading the discussion. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Shannon Carto. I will be your moderator, as Jamie said, for this discussion. Today, I'm going to be in conversation with 3 members of the Black Environmental Alliance, which I have the honor of being a member of as well. And today we'll be specifically speaking, or they will be specifically speaking about their individual journeys to fulfilling careers in conservation. During the discussion, you'll gain insights into their struggles, triumphs, and wins that they've each experienced throughout their careers. And there'll be time at the end for a Q&A, so please stick around. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping notes for this webinar. So first, all of our attendees are muted, and you will note you will not be able to speak or appear on video. You will find a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen if you're not familiar with Zoom. And at any time during the webinar, I encourage you to type your questions in the box and press enter to have them posted. You may direct questions at individual presenters or the panel as a whole, and you can upvote a question that you like by pressing the thumbs up. We will be reviewing the questions, and we will have time to pose some of them to our panelists following the moderated discussion. So please feel free to interact with others during the webinar through the chat. And to our panelists, as a reminder to use your mute button when you're not speaking, and of course to unmute yourself when you are. The webinar is being recorded so that others who are unable to attend can listen in at a later date. So with that, I would like to welcome BEA's co-founder and my friend, Julius Lindsay.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks for Latornell for having us today. And so this webinar built on a past Latornell webinar, but also built on a past BA webinar that we had during Black History Month earlier this year that was called Be Hired. And we were pretty overwhelmed with the positive response. And when the opportunity to work with Latornell came up, we were really excited to continue the conversation that we started in March. And so in terms of the Black Environmentalist Alliance, or B as we affectionately call it, it's hard to believe that it's almost 2 years now that we've been sort of working together. And in the wake of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Regis Korchinski-Paquette incidences in 2020, we came together to have a conversation as Black folks who work in the environmental field, and many of us are quite isolated or don't know others. In the group, there was only really, in that initial group of about 12 to 13 people, there was only 2 or 3 of us that brought that group together, and so many of us didn't know other Black people working in this field. And we really came together to support each other, and what came of that initial conversation was B, and our mission is really to champion Black people who work in this field, to create a community and create safe space for peer-to-peer organizations and engagement, and to address issues of climate justice and environmental justice. And so I also want to read out B's Oriki, and if you're unfamiliar with the idea of an Oriki, it's we call it a hype mantra. It originates with the Yoruba in West Africa, and it's really a way of us in a very short sort of poetic fashion talking about who we are. And so I will read B's Oriki. First of its kind, individual strengths powering and energizing a movement, uniquely Black perspectives, inspirator and supporter of Black environmentalists, safe space for change, catalyzing an array of talent and expertise, building a sustainable Black community, creators of excellent, equitable futures, purveyors of knowledge. And that's it for me. I'll pass it back to Shannon.
Thank you, Julius. Okay. So just building on sort of what Julius was just talking about, BEA's ambitions are to support Black people who are looking to join the environmental field or are looking to advance their careers, which really brought us together, as Julius has pointed out. And for BEA, it's important for us to share our stories and hear other stories. And it's important to build a supportive network so that we can all lift each other up. So we wanted to talk about what it's like to work in the field that is not as diverse as it could be, and have a real conversation about how we can improve this. Hopefully at the end of the hour, you'll walk away with a better understanding of what it's been like to be a Black person in this space. Just want to remind everybody that this is a safe space. We want to hear from everybody and hear your thoughts. So please send your questions in the chat, and we're going to try our best to get to all of them. So to open this session, I'm just going to ask all of our panelists, Kirk, Zamani, and Julius, to just give us a 2 to 3 minute snapshot of your journey, of your career.
do you want? If you just
So
anybody
maybe
just
I'll
go.
start with, yeah, Zamani, you can start.
Greetings, everyone. It's so good to be here with all of you. I can't see all of you, but I can feel you. And I definitely want to give thanks, first of all, to the conference organizers for this moment. Really appreciate the time, and I get to be on panel with B. So I'm Zamani Rob. I'm the founder of SEED Canada, and SEED stands for Circular Environmental Education. And we work with social housing communities, low-income communities that are predominantly racialized and with a high immigrant population, to discuss and figure out how to make climate action simple, convenient, and culturally relevant. And so I guess we'll talk more about sort of my journey towards this moment, but generally we work with shifting people's mindset and hopefully leading to behavioral change when it comes to organizing where we put our waste, but also leading into how we talk about climate justice and equity within the environmental movement, particularly here in Canada. Yeah.
Thank you. Kirk, did you want to go next? Oh, you're on mute. There. Oh, still on mute. I'm not sure what's happening there.
There we go. How's
There
that?
we go.
There we go. Hi, I'm Kirk Johnson from Eco Efficiency Consulting, and my background is starting off in performance contracting and energy services, but then I moved on to developing programs, and then now doing things like workforce development and things like that. So rather than talk about my personal journey, I'd like to kind of share kind of the differences between where things were and where things are through the programs. Because like when we're doing things like stakeholder engagement, back in the earlier days when it was OPA days and high performance new construction days, there was very limited inclusive stakeholder engagement that was happening. And in fact, a recent report by Dr. Hoyka and the McConnell Foundation talked about how difficult it is and how limited it is the outreach to Black and racialized communities are in stakeholder engagement. But at least the recognition is there. But back in the past, when we were doing performance construction, there was none. Now there is a lot of work that's happening on the workforce development side, and it's really helping us get representation included as we build projects forward, right? The other part that I think is relevant is when we're talking about, especially for the group here, which is a lot of conservation authority and municipalities, when you're doing things like voluntary programs and standards and municipal programs and provincial programs, the experience historically was that we didn't consider racialized communities and build in outreach and inclusive messages to them, versus now where we've got things like the CUSP program, which has the Canadian mapping of racialized communities, low income. It has a great coverage so that you're able to do equity analysis and assessments on your programs, whether it's for community energy planning, land use planning, program design, and things like that, right? The last thing I would kind of want to wrap up with is understanding that diversity is something that has to be adopted and embraced at the senior level. And maybe Mara, if you can throw up that slide there that we talked about, the representation slide. All right. This one talks, yeah, oh, thank you, right. This slide is a Canadian study, two different Canadian studies, one which is from Osler, which is for the public companies that are on the stock market, and their representation, which is 22% of visible minorities, but only 6.8% representation on the board levels. And then we go to the more municipal, NGO, ABC type agencies. And this is a diversity lead study by 2020 in Ryerson. And they talk about how in different markets, the distribution of Black and racialized populations varies widely between the different markets, but also that the representation of Black individuals on these boards or in decision-making positions is about 52% lower than the representation that they would have for their population, right? And we can unpack that later, but the end of the story is that there's some great efforts that are being done, but there's still a long way to go, and we're not even halfway there in many cases. Okay, so over to you, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk. I love that you threw in a teachable learning moment there. I appreciate
Thanks.
that. I learned a lot there. I'm gonna have to look at that slide afterwards. But I'll pass it over to Julius.
Yeah, so I'm Julius Lindsay. I am the Director of Sustainable Communities at the David Suzuki Foundation. I've only been at the foundation for about a year. My 1-year anniversary is coming up on Tuesday. And so previous to that, I spent the previous 10 years in municipalities leading the development of climate change plans in both the city of Mississauga and the city of Richmond Hill. I know there's some folks from Mississauga here today, shout out to you. And sort of previous to that, I spent a few years at the provincial level doing energy management and climate change policies and all sorts of climate change related work and energy management work for the provincial real estate portfolio. And so, yeah, that's me.
Awesome, thanks everybody. Okay, with that, we can jump into the roundtable questions. So first question that I have for each of you, and maybe we'll start with Zamani. How have you experienced systemic anti-Black racism in your career? And how would you navigate it knowing what you know now?
Yes, thank you for that question, Shannon. So this is such a heavy question. It's hard to answer in, sort of a 2 minutes kind of thing. I'll do it through, I like to tell stories a lot because my life has a lot of them. so I will use an example, I guess I could say. So I was working for a large organization and in their sustainability department. And at the time I was actually in university at York. And so this was an internship. And it was it was a prestigious organization. And when I got the job, it was so amazing to me. And I was so excited that I decided to document it in sort of journaling and so on, right? And the position was to be, to work in the sustainability office. And so we would help do educational workshops to various stakeholders. So got the position, and of course, I got this position. It was mainly, of course, white folks that I am working with, and so I was so overjoyed that I decided, like I said, to start writing. As we go through, I ended up working for a manager who was amazing. And so what that meant is she took the ideas that I brought to the table and actually started to not only listen to them, but starting to implement them. So I can only explain this from the experiential side, because of course I don't have enough information to say what happened on the other side. But what ended up happening was that as I was working day to day, documenting my experiences of just going through the day, we had gone on a few shows and done a few educational workshops. And in one of the shows, the group that we were working with started to change how they interacted with me. So, conversation became very sharp, and, there's things I noticed that they weren't really taking my ideas and running with them as before. And so that went on for a few weeks, and as it came to a head, what ended up happening is I came into the office one day, and the manager that was so outstanding with me basically told me that I was no longer allowed to be on the rotating workshops that we were doing in the different educational sectors. So when that happened, immediately I was, cut out. I didn't get to go on the shows and so on. And then after that, I was let go. I was told that the nature of my position has changed, and as a result, they no longer would need my services. Now, this was an opportunity that was scheduled to run from September until, well into the summer of the next year. And so this was like the third month that it happened. And I thought, wow, that's really quick. And when I looked at all the things that I was documenting, all the experiences, people began throwing things at me when I asked for when I asked for something. You know, it was the behavior shifted over time, and I was able to capture it in my journal based on the experiences that I was writing. And so it was tough, you know, to navigate that, because what do you do? And I had no explanation for it. So as I was documenting all of my highs and lows, you know, I couldn't see what they used to justify that I was that it was time for me to leave. So that was hard to navigate. And it taught me quite a lovely lesson, though. You know, I always talk to friends and family about being shiny, especially when I talk to younger people. I talk about being your best self and, you know, using your genius and displaying that genius when you go into certain spaces. And so what it taught me at that time is that when you have been told that your shininess is no longer required, it means it's no longer required there in that particular moment, but it's required somewhere else. So I left and then started my own nonprofit, and here we are. So in terms of what I would do differently, I don't think I would, or what I would, you know, the information that I have now, I don't really think about life like that, because I think that all those experiences carry some major jewels. And so, you know, thankfully, I think the one thing that was helpful is documenting the experiences. And I have a day-to-day record of things that took place from my experiential point of view. And I think that's really what was helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know these stories are not easy to go back to and to share, but I appreciate that. And I love the end. You know, I feel like you embody like Maya Angelou's famous saying, right? Wouldn't take anything from a journey, because these experiences can make or break you, right? So clearly it's made you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Julius, did you want to go next?
Sure, and I'm gonna, I oftentimes when I talk about these things, I try and connect them in my brain, and I think I'm gonna connect them around the word erasure. And I often think about and look at my career and look at the things that I've done, and sort of this ongoing idea of erasure and questioning around, like, have you really done anything? Like, you know, the questioning of expertise, like, as I said in my introduction, like, you know, I wrote the Richmond Hill Climate Change Plan. I've led the development of I basically did the whole Mississauga plan and had to leave under less than ideal circumstances. And sort of I still face on a very regular basis erasure of my skills and my my expertise. I was having a conversation with a leader in this in the movement, and you know, they said, and you can see me physically, like I wear my beard long, I wear my hair long very intentionally, because I love my black hair, and it is a statement of radical self-love for myself. And I had a leader in this movement talk about the fact that he's never seen anybody. He goes to conferences across the country and he doesn't see people like me. And I'm like, when you're talking to the person who is sort of like presents this way, like that is sort of like instant erasure of me. And so I've often struggled, and I think it's only recently that I'm really realizing the impact of this erasure in terms of my career and what I've done. And so when the second asked the question, like, what do I do? How would I navigate it knowing what I know now? Like, as you hear me talk about my career and my experience, if you had heard me talk about it maybe 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said some of the things that I just said. I wouldn't have talked about myself from the expertise and the proficiency that I have, and the, I mean, I'll be shameless, the kick-ass career that I've been fortunate enough to have over the past 15 years. A couple of years ago, I interviewed for a role, and somebody in the Black Environmentalist Alliance worked for the organization and called me up the phone after my second interview and basically was like, what are you doing? Why are you not bragging about yourself? Here's all the things that I see you doing, and you didn't say any of this to you. You need to fix yourself. And I appreciated that phone call, because there's nothing that they said that I would have disagreed with, but I would never have said any of those things about myself. And so, you know, I think there's an aspect to this of being a bit shameless and being a bit, you know, self-promotional, because of the fact that, you know, as Black people, especially in this movement, we have to be exceptional. And I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they're like, why do we always have to be exceptional? And I'm like, part of that is to combat the erasure. You have to be exceptional to be seen as worthy. You have to present yourself in a certain way to combat that constant erasure that tries to get people of color and Black people, more specifically in this movement, hidden or erased, or, you know, to not have a voice. And so that's something that it's super uncomfortable for me, because I'm sort of used to letting my work speak for itself. But I've sort of had to embody and had to start to really start to speak about myself that way, because, you know, if I don't, then I'm just going to continue to be erased. I'm going to allow the people to have the power over my message. And so I have to find my message, I have to use my message, and I have to put myself forward as an expert, as somebody who has much experience, as somebody who is a leader in this space, to try and combat some of that erasure that happens to people like me in this movement.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you brought up, you know, the importance of, you know, self-love, and also, you know, acknowledging the pressure that people of color might feel in this field, that it's real, and that it's shared. And I think a lot of organizations don't understand that, and how they could help to, you know, combat that, and the stress that it puts on employees. So thank you. Kirk?
There we go. Like I said, my lens is through programs, right? Like I see a few things in my journey and my experience where systemic racism, baked-in racism impacted, right? Like, and it's really in the voices, right? Like, is your voice appreciated, even accepted, even if it's a contrary voice, right? And there have been many times when, I'll give you an example where we were recommending that you do a green new construction program in the province of Ontario, and anybody in North America would know that. And it fell on deaf ears until the Americans came up and met with the executive team and said, of course, you have to do a green new construction program. Everyone does it. It's all over North America, right? And so there's that voice issue there, right? The other issue, and I'm following along some lines that we'll see surface later, is the issue of fairness. Do you think that you're going to get a fair shake when you're doing work, and will it be recognized, and will you be promoted on the same equitable level as others? And I can tell you that certainly was not the case, right? But what you do is that you find people where that is appreciated, right? Right now we are seeing the Great Resignation. We're seeing that there's a sense right now with automation and digital transformation and what's happening with the just transition that we need to get people from all different backgrounds to actually accomplish this decarbonization mission by 2030, 2040, or 2050. And so, whereas before it was, I don't want to be equitable or fair or accept voices, now there's an appreciation that if we don't bring these voices in, that we won't be able to remain competitive, and that we won't be able to lead and grow and become the municipality, conservation agency, NGO, or community that we want to become, right? And I guess the last one I would say in terms of on a program lens and a context of how things are changing from before versus after is one of decision making, right? And I'll do this in a program design element, right? And in a program design element, back in the days of OPA and Better Business Partnership with someone like Richard Morris, who was an amazing mentor. Like he ran that Better Buildings Partnership Office and did so much work on incentives and new construction and everything in energy efficiency back in the day. And so having him as a mentor really, really helped. But in the end, we were beholden to the funding determinants of the province, and that didn't allow us to do as much inclusivity as we did in the past. We specifically did not have the decision-making authority to do the things that we knew as program managers and program delivery agents that we could and should do. And this is the city of Toronto not being able to do this against the province, right? Now we go to a space where in things like tower renewal, in things like net zero and Better Homes TO, where there is specific inclusionary policies, there's specific inclusionary outreach, there's understanding of building that into the assessment process. And there's also an internal looking one where you look inside and you do the assessments in your workplace to say, we can't just do this with the programs and the people that we serve. We also have to do this with the organization that I'm with. And so while I've gone through a lot and I've seen a lot of stuff, I'm kind of heartened that if you add a 0 to the budgets that you're talking about, and you go on with these great strategies that are emerging, that yeah, anything is possible, and we can and will get where we need to go. Move on up, indeed.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point, which is how far we've come in terms of thinking about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in my career as well, like I can see like how far we've come, and it's a stark contrast. And I think these type of things do take time, but I do think like we're headed in the right direction, as you've talked about. So, but I think we in all of our careers, I think we've seen this the progression. Okay, so moving to the next question. Can we explore the intersection of race and gender issues in the workplace? And this question is something that I've always found, I do find really interesting, and always so insightful. Sometimes a hard topic to understand, but I'll throw it back to Zamani to start us off. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are the same as you, because yes, and right now, maybe not so much in work, but definitely when I was in university, and a mom, sole support parent, and then doing the environmental work and community work. So I find that when I was doing my papers, I had some professors who were really interested in understanding the full circumstance that I was working through. And then I had some professors, look straight at me and say, we don't really care about that. You need to hand in your assignment, whenever it's due, when everyone else is due. And so despite documentation of circumstances and whatnot, it didn't have any bearing. So for me, what that costs me at the time was I actually didn't get an opportunity to finish school. I blanked out on my last 2 exams just due to the incredible amount of stress that took a toll on how I was able to participate. And so it also cost me like a little bit of my health, and being, at the time when you're living very, very, very low income and on very fixed income, it was incredibly challenging to navigate that, to navigate those waters. At some point as well, I actually didn't think I was going to make it, just because there was so much to deal with, so much to juggle. And it didn't leave any space for me to see myself as a winner in, while I was going through. So I had friends that would look at me and say, but you're doing it, you're in school, you're making it. But I could not see any of that at all. I couldn't see my contributions. I couldn't see myself, really. And so I actually, had to stop. But even the stop cost me something. There was, when I stop, everything stops. So it was really challenging, particularly identify as a woman and a Black woman. And so to be in a school setting where, most of the folks who are our educational, stewards didn't understand what you had to say, couldn't see your point of view, and couldn't make any leeway for you to just get in the chair to sit down and even take in the information that was required to do the work that is necessary to push us forward. Through all of that, I still managed, definitely through a lot of support, I have a good support network. And through that group of friends and family and people, I was able to eventually, get out of it, but it costs. It cost me, it costs a lot. It costs the education. I look forward to going back to school at some point. And it cost, my health. And it still does in some instances, even working now with my nonprofit, we're a very small team. But again, women's work, or even, I shouldn't say just women's work, but if you're a single parent or parenting right now, it's really, really challenging to do all of that and then to run the organization and then to create, connect with all the collaborators and to do all that it's a lot of work. And there's, my mom, for example, she's always telling me to rest. And so I tried that option. Again, when I rested, everything stopped. And when the benefit of the rest was kind of squashed when I returned to work, because now I not only have the current work to do, I have work from that has been piled up because I stopped. So, a different strategy is required, but that different strategy that's required also cost me something. So I don't have a vacation, I don't get to go away and, see and do or relax and take a moment to do what is necessary really for me to continue, because I don't have that kind of time, because of the work that parents do, because of the work that is required to change a system or change systems or contribute to changing systems. So even sitting on an advisory board, it's still work, and then that intersectionality of valuing the work that is being done, particularly because I come from the community side. So even that, valuing the community work, the time and the energy that it takes to put an event together or to put on an event or a webinar or what have you, to prepare for that. I'm a really good student. I love school, so I like to study before I do things well. So it's all of those things. It costs quite a bit. And I think with, knowing the benefit that I consider that I have right now is having gone through all of that, working with Seed now and me running the show, I get to decide how to make provisions for others when they come to work with us. So I think, yeah, that's where, kind of merges at the moment.
Yeah. I don't think you're alone. I think there's probably a lot of people in the audience who are probably saying a silent amen to that. I am. So thank you for sharing that.
You can say out loud amen. I did respond back to. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, I'll pass it back to Julius.
Yeah, I was one of those people who said amen. And as you were speaking, my wife messaged me to see if the kids were too loud. So it was an interesting juxtaposition of your comments, Amani. But I'm obviously a man, and so I'm aware of sort of my position in this sort of conversation, and I'm aware of the dynamics that happen when, me as a man and my male privilege, if I can call it that, that I have when I show up in spaces and when I and my experiences, in my current organization, I am the only Black man in the organization. And my experience is definitely different than the other racialized women in the organization, and especially the other Black women in the organization. And, so in my current role, I have positional power, I have male privilege, but I am also a Black person who faces erasure. And so I always have to be cognizant when I'm working with others and when I'm thinking about my place in the organization, my experiences, my places in the movement more broadly as well. I remember at one point I had the opportunity to participate in a conversation with the Minister of Women at the time. And so I reached out to the Black Environmentalist Alliance B and asked, oh, I'm getting in front of this minister. Do you have questions you want to ask her? And so I show up on the day and I'm the only man in the room. And I think all the other women there were racialized. And so like getting there, I'm like, I'm just gonna be quiet. And I felt bad because like I came with all these questions from the group to ask these questions, but I also had to recognize that like, you know, I need to play my position. And the conversation was around women's issues. And so I think it's really important to be conscious of the fact that you know, that intersectional nature of being Black and being a woman means that you face particular oppressions that me as a Black man may never face. And my role as a Black man is to support Black women and other racialized women in terms of dealing with those oppressions and not centering myself, because oftentimes in these conversations, men will center themselves, they will center the support that they are supposed to get, because oftentimes women are caregivers and men are looking at women to support them. And so we have to be really conscious about those kinds of dynamics, even among oppressed groups, because those types of dynamics can create oppression within oppressed groups. And that is something that I definitely do not want to harm others by participating in that. And so it's really important to be aware of those dynamics and to help work against them.
Thank you. I think you touch on such an important point, which is about being conscious of these things. And I think it's a hard thing to do, right? Because there's a number of things that you're doing in your workday, and you know, to always keep that lens on, it's not easy, right? And I find like having a complicit bias training has been really helpful. And people are always surprised when I say I've done it, right? But it's like, I have mine too, right? And I want to know what my blinders are and where I need to sort of put that lens on, because we all have it, right? So thank you for touching on that. Kirk?
Yeah, why don't at this point we do the mid-session poll? I want to kind of do some engagement with the rest of the audience, do some interaction. Can you pop up the poll?
Sure, yeah, we can do that. I was going to do that after, but yeah, we can do that right now. Okay.
Do we have any, do you want to just show the results?
Sure, I'll ask Mario, are you able to post those results?
Momentarily here. Results
Momentarily?
are still coming
All right.
in.
Okay, great. I'll just give some background on it. While we wait for the results to come in, I mean, obviously I'm coming from a very different perspective, but the issue of intersectionality, particularly as it involves gender and race and cultural background, there really is a significant impact of intersectionality, but there's also a huge intersectionality bonus if you properly channel it. So there has been there's not been a true appreciation of what those impacts are. And I'll just, as a small example, there's an excellent, very, very relevant report, a peer-reviewed article called "The Challenges and Supports for Women Conservation Leaders." So I figure this is the place where this would make a lot of sense to sort of mention. And it goes through on a very granular fashion all of the challenges that women conservation leaders typically go through in the workplace, in decision-making, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is even more so if you want to bring in the issues of intersectionality of gender and race, right? And so if you guys want to get a sense of what that really is and what that sounds like, that's not for me to say because it's not my experience, because I'm not that person, not that gender, but that is in my mind an excellent article. And I've asked many of my colleagues in academia and they've said, yes, that one actually nails it, right? How are we doing on the polls? All right. So in terms of targets, that's good to see. So we've got company DEI targets, that makes sense. And then active recruitment and then bias screening. We'll get to that probably when we start talking about workplace. But when we start getting to the question of intersectionality issues of gender and race, I think that everyone's in agreement. It's 52% think that there's a significant impact, 35% on a moderate, 7% on nominal, and 6% no, right? So, why don't we contrast that with some, data and a report that was done on intersectionality of gender and race. So maybe Mario, if you want to throw that up. And there's a lot of numbers on it, but I'll explain that chart, right? This is from a workplace diversity, inclusion, and intersectionality study, where they asked on the left about, are you able to voice a contrary opinion without fear of repercussion? And they broke it down by the different types of intersectionality. And then on the middle one, you've got, in terms of the fairness, do you think that we are equally given an opportunity to succeed? And you can see the breakdowns on people's agreement with that across the board, across the intersectionality segments, right? And then the last one is on decision-making of, do you have a voice? Are you on the board? Are you on the executive team? Or are you included in decision-makings that possibly you're responsible for? And you can see how the breakdown is across the board. Those are a lot of numbers on the top, but if you look on the bottom and contrast that with what we said in the survey, I think people are in agreement that certainly on the issue of gender, there is a significant gap between how the voices are heard, what the fairness, a sense of fairness is received, and whether they believe, whether people of a particular intersectionality think that they have an influence on the decision-making process. And if you look at the lower levels and the lower ranges, they tend to be places where there's no racial intersectionality. And if you look at the higher ranges, it is typically, if not always, in the places where there's race and gender intersectionality. So if we want to see what the gaps are between different segments, it's right there in front of you. And I think we can all agree that it's pretty significant. So rather than me pontificating over a subject that I don't know about, I mean, I've just presented the data there, and I think it aligns with what people are saying. And I think I'll just shut up at that point and say, read that, Challenges and Supports for Women Conservation Leaders, because it'll kind of give you the full, down to the detail inquiries and suggestions that you might be looking for.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirk. Okay. So moving to the next question, I think we've kind of touched on a lot about the sort of like where we are right now and the progress that we've made. I'd like to hear from all the panelists about, how do you imagine the future of conservation? How does your identity inform that vision? We'll start with Zimani.
Yeah, okay. Thanks again for that question, Shannon. Future of conservation, I think within the environmental space period, I think that it's just fundamental that we start engaging folks from the very beginning, from the conceptual phase. So when we're thinking about things and what conservation might look like for our communities and so on, the folks who need to be at the table are all of the stakeholders. So if you have, if we're talking about, low-income, racialized, or underserved groups, there needs to be space for them at the table from the beginning to help and contribute to the conceptualization of whatever it is they would like to see. But not only do they need to have space at the table, there needs to be their agency needs to be supported. So they need to be able to say and actually carry out some of the work or some of the thoughts or some of the artwork or some of whatever contribution they feel they can make. That needs to be honored and actually taken up and run with in many cases. So many times, particularly over the last couple of years, especially in the face of when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and so on, what I've come to realize is that a lot of folks are talking about equity and diversity and inclusion like a checkbox on a checklist. And for me, that's how we've continued, that's how things have kind of continuously gotten by, just because you say it, it's like, oh, okay, so we're doing it. No, equity, this work is hard work. It's hard for both parties, so all who are involved, it's challenging. So when we talk about what the future might look like, it's very different from me. For me, the major piece is really including us in the beginning. But it's harder because it's not just me. There's more folks who need to be there, to offer their genius and have that genius taken up and run with. That I think for me is I mean, there's much more I could say, but I think in general for our listening audience, I think that's really the key. If you're going to do something, so in the context of conservation, if you want to do something in a particular community, when you're thinking of it, that's when you need to contact the community so they can think alongside you and then offer, insights and so on from there. I think I'll leave it there for now.
I think you touched on like a key observation, but I think it would help to have a support. I think a lot we push out a lot of like how to do the DEIs, but it's not really accompanied with why, right? To have that time to talk about why it's important, and then that really pushes forward action.
Can I just say one more thing, Shannon? Yeah, there is a level of unlearning that actually needs to happen. And so when I listen for DEI work that people claim that they're doing or heading or running with, I'm actually listening for the stuff that's tough, the things that they themselves doing the work find challenging to navigate. When I don't hear that and I don't see it, it's one thing to hear it. But if I don't hear that, if I don't see it, that makes me think a little bit differently about whether or not I personally would be engaging with you or and at what level, because there is a level of unlearning that needs to happen in order for some of the other work to emerge. That unlearning doesn't happen, it continuously becomes even more challenging because now we know, and now you're just not doing what you're supposed to do at all, and that cannot work. It doesn't serve us either, right?
That's so important and so interesting. Yeah, I think we could have a whole session on
girl.
That's the next one.
Thank you.
All right, I'll pass it over to Julius.
Sure, thanks, Shannon. And I wanted to build on something that Zamani said right there. I'd actually take it a step further and say that that relationship building should start before you want or need anything. Like relationships, genuine relationships to be built need to start like now. And so when you get to needing something, you have the relationship, because if you're going to come to me and ask me for something and I don't know you, what are the likelihood that I'm going to give you what you want, and ultimately at the end of the day, if you're coming for me for something and I'm getting nothing in return, then even more so, like, why would I want to give you what you want? And I spent a lot of time working in municipalities, as I said, and sort of the traditional paradigm, that's it. Like, we go to the public when we need something, and the public is little more than a nuisance that we feel like we have to check a box that we talk to them, but we don't really want to talk to them because we don't really want to hear what they have to say, and we're the experts. And it's a very sort of top-down colonial way of operating. And if I'm reimagining the future, that needs to be bottom up. We need to rethink, as Zamani said. I want to just uplift what she said. We need to rethink and tear down these structures and rethink, how do we engage communities? How do we get to know communities? I had a conversation with somebody who spent a lot of time working in parks in Atlanta. And because of the sort of lack of funding that American cities, because Americans hate taxes, have, a lot of the stuff that we in Canada do as governments are done by small NGOs and neighborhood community groups in Atlanta. But part of the way that happens is that the city folks know, okay, this park, these are the people that we go to talk to this park, who know all the people in the neighborhood, who can create those connections to the community, and those networks are strong. And obviously Atlanta has a long social justice history that bolsters those networks. But like, that is the way that a lot of the work on the ground in Atlanta happens. Whereas here, like, if that group even exists, it might be one or two people who run a group, and those are the two people who, are wealthy enough, are old enough, possibly retired, to spend all day in City Hall working with city staff. And don't have those connections, to strong connections to the community. And so for me, in terms of reimagining conservation, like that's the first step, is reimagining the connection to community. How do we connect to community? How do we involve community? I think the second part of it for me that I wanted to touch on was around the idea of conservation. And so oftentimes we think of conservation, we're thinking about an area that's way out far away, that's, you know, natural and forest, and that we don't touch, and that, like, oh, we have to preserve that area. But what about the spaces that are around the corner of us? What about the spaces in our neighborhoods? What about the spaces in our street? I was just on the weekend, went to an event in downtown Mississauga, and like you go into Mississauga Celebration Square on a Friday evening and the square is full. All the people who live in the condos around that area, like that square is their backyard. And so how are we thinking about conservation, not as some remote area that we need to protect, but how are we incorporating nature into our neighborhoods? How are we thinking about nature in terms of our city context? How are we thinking about nature as a part of the city and not something that we have to drive 2 hours to and go to our cottage, or drive 2 hours and sit in a tent, or something that needs to be pristine that we don't touch and isn't integrated into our lives, you know? And so we need to think about, and that jumps off to a number of different solutions, from a climate change perspective, from a waste, a stormwater perspective. There's all of these types of solutions that we can solve if we rethink the way that we integrate with nature, and how conservation can be a concept within an urban city and not just within the rural areas. And I think that's really a really important key point, because we often don't think about these. Well, I think a lot of people on this call probably do, but the normal paradigm does not take that into account when we are planning our cities. When we are planning our cities, we do not, as a basis, think about how are we increasing nature. We do not think of the basis, how are we making this resilient to climate change. This is a paradigm that has been created within probably the last couple of years. And so there is that sort of idea of conservation of areas that exist, and especially remote areas, but there is this idea of conservation within a city context that is really important, that we need to focus on more, because it's the solution to many of the challenges within the city. You know, I think about, I often use this as an example. I've done some back of the napkin calculations, and gun shootings in Toronto are closely correlated to summer temperatures in Toronto. And so the hotter the summer, the more gun violence there is in the city. And so when you think about that, you think about, okay, there are people who may be taking on crime, you know, they may not have air conditioning, their neighborhoods may not have a lot of nature, so they're super hot, and so they're not sleeping at night, and so they're irritable, and then they're more likely to engage in crime. And so when we think about, you know, more nature in our cities, that is a crime prevention statistic. That is a climate resilience statistic. That is something that we do to solve intersectional and multiples of the challenges that we have within cities. And so, you know, conservation needs to go beyond sort of the natural areas into how does conservation become a part of creating a safe and city with high well-being. And I will stop there.
No, I love that you brought that up, and I feel like I can feel the energy maybe in the attendees that maybe they might be sitting on their hands. So I definitely want to put it out there. I'd love to hear from, you know, the conservation authorities or municipalities that are in the room today, and how they feel about the topic that you just brought up about rethinking conservation. I love that you also touched on rethinking climate change and what that really means to communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll pass it over to Kirk.
All right. I've been doing I've done like, I think 8 waves of conservation, starting from Ontario hydro incentives back in the day for T8 lights. And these things do come in waves. And I believe that we actually finally have the intersection of all of the waves, and we all actually get it. During pandemic, when we're all saying, well, once we got out of this crazy situation that we're in, and we are now getting out of this crazy situation that we were in, these are the things that we want to do because we want to have a just transition, and we actually need to have diversity in order to accomplish these very, very, very ambitious 2030, 2040, 2050 goals. So a lot of great work was done in those days, and now they're just coming out. Like, and I'll give some examples, right? Like, they're just releasing, or they just released the energy equity framework, right? CUSP has an energy equity tool that maps all across Canada, and you can see which are the houses that need renos and which are in energy poverty or energy challenges areas. And you can do programs that address that and do outreach for that. There's agencies like the Conference Board that are looking at how do you transition people from different sectors that are being affected by automation and moving them into sustainability, because we need a ton of people to actually grow and deliver on all the work that has to be done. And all the studies by them saying that there's people that actually want to go in, like 70% of people if asked said, I would love to do and have a green job, but I don't know if it's going to be the same level, what skills are required, and is it, by the time I get there, will the job that I want be there, right? And we haven't done a great job about getting people from other sectors to go into or transition into sustainability. So while we recognize these challenges, there's other peoples in other jurisdictions that are doing some really, really good stuff with some great best practices. Like NEEP in the United States has an equity workforce development program. They also have actual implementable strategies for doing equity in your community development. So that's NEEP. And they've done a ton of work in that area. City of Toronto has done a ton of work in that area, right? And I think that, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We have to look and see who is early adopters on this and see how we want to adapt it to our particular context and demographics. You saw from the diversity lead study where they looked at 8 Canadian cities, and the distribution of diversity, racialized minorities, Black minorities, and women across the country. And obviously women, there tends to be a pretty consistent number around that. But for diversity and for racialized representation, it is all over the map, ranging from, you know, 11% to 50% in 2 different communities that are less than 200 kilometers apart. So as we recognize that there's differences and we have to tune them, there's all of these tools that are available to us. And I guess what I'm going to leave you guys with is we have to stop looking at it as if it is a cost center or a compliance issue or something that we have to do. It is actually something that you want to do, because that is where the opportunities are. You get better, faster decisions with a diverse team. And frankly, if you look at the analysis, Julia's had that correlation between weather temperatures and crime rate. There's also a high correlation between the cities that are very well insulated against this wave of automation and digital transformation and the ones that are very vulnerable. And it actually breaks down on how diverse are those communities. So the ones that are very diverse are more robust and resilient in this very big changing wave that's happening. And every single IT, finance, real estate, not sustainability, but real estate, property management says data analytics, DEI, and ESG are driving it, and we're getting huge returns from it. And I think it's just time for sustainability to kind of step up. And I want to give shout outs to 2 organizations that are kind of doing some cool stuff. ULI is doing some, Urban Land Institute is doing some great stuff with apartments and multifamily and building in inclusive development and inclusive programs to decarbonize and make it inclusive to the communities, like that, engaging them instead of just pushing them off. And then there's agencies like Efficiency Canada that are doing some really good stuff on that front of actually putting people out there and saying, these are people that are highly visible that are doing stuff. So it's not just stories of why aren't we doing this? It's here's where it's working. And here's where you guys might want to say, let's not do that and let's do this. So I'm going to leave you with that and say, add a 0 to your budgets, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Kirk. Yeah, I'm glad you sharing those resources, because I do feel like sometimes it can be really overwhelming, whether you're embarking on a new program or initiative related to diversity, equity, inclusion. or you're just trying to, move a current program through, it's always good to, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot happening, but sometimes it's hard to find those resources. So especially thankful that you identified some that might be helpful to the attendees. So with that, I'm just going to open up. We're going to move to the sort of open Q&A. So I'm just going to open up and see what questions that we have for our panelists. Okay, so the first question we have from Heather White. How do you think about the concept of limited capacity? I'm thinking about how I can't do it all at once, all alone. How do you go about deciding what to do now and what to leave for later or for others? Very good question. Thank you. So Zamani, did you want to, or anybody who feels that they might have a response, you guys can.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. Actually, I did. I saw that question by Heather, and I want to say thank you, Heather, for your question. It's very relevant and poignant for me. So I will start by telling you this: get in where you fit in, and to remember that I'm not sure what your background is like in terms of your work and what you bring to the table, but you obviously bring some kind of genius, some kind of level of knowledge and expertise that we must hear, we want to hear, and we want to know about. So I would say to do your best to ensure that you're taking care of yourself, and so that you're taking care of yourself so that you can contribute the work that is necessary for you to contribute. And I promise you, we will make room for you. So develop whatever it is that you want to contribute. If you can focus on some, one or two things, so that it doesn't take you, so that you can do it within the limited capacity that you have at the moment. Maybe it won't always stay that way. But I would encourage you to just get in where you fit in. And we will tag along with you, ride alongside you. If you're going to lead, we will support you whichever way. But it really does matter what you want to contribute, and then making space for that contribution by also taking care of yourself, so that you can contribute to the work in a valuable way that doesn't cost you, doesn't cost you your time, energy, space, or ability to be. So I went from student into, living and being and doing, and then out of that, merging into all those experiences have led me to have to start the nonprofit. And so starting a nonprofit, working at, I'm a very active mom. I'm on my son's parent council at school and all these things, but I do my best. There are times when it gets really busy, but I do my best to also balance by taking rest, and then looking at what it is I really like, fine tuning what I can contribute. And sometimes finding colorful ways to say no, or saying no straight up, depending on who I'm talking to, so that you can, cultivate that space of creativity so you can offer whatever it is you want to offer to us. But we will make room for you. So do your best to do your best. And yeah, I think that's how I would like to offer that to you. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Imani. I'd love to hear more about your colorful ways of saying no. I need to learn that.
Yes, I will.
I'm going to follow up with you. All right, Julius.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that to say that, nobody should be doing this work alone. And so I've been the one environment or climate change person before. And my solution to that, I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, my solution to that is partnerships. There are always willing partnerships and people willing to work with you to do the things that you want to do. Where there is a will, there is a way. And obviously, as Zamani said, you only have so much capacity, and this is a long game. And so we all need to take care of ourselves first. But there are ways to do this work with others, and the others are not always folks that are in this movement. And I'll give sort of one specific example that from my personal past. When I was in Mississauga, we were developing the climate change plan. We actually partnered with an escape room company to develop a climate change escape room. And so that escape room was an engagement that we did to engage the public around what they wanted to see in the climate change plan. And so we did a little survey before. We asked them questions about climate change and their knowledge. They went through escape room, and then we asked them questions at the end. And we had I think over 1,000 people go through that escape room. And when we went into it, we were just like, we like escape rooms. We want to do this. It sounds cool. And the results that came out of it were so ridiculously fabulous. It was like really amazing. And I knew I was successful because I knew we were successful. I shouldn't say I, because there was a team. At that point, I was hiring some folks for my team, and I was having conversation with our HR team. And so he asked me, like, you know, we had never met before, so he was asking about the team to get a feel for like what kind of person I'm looking to hire, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm explaining about the climate change plan, the work that we're doing. He's like, oh yeah, I was at the mall on the weekend. I went through this escape room with my wife and my son, and like he loved it, and like it was amazing. And I was like, yeah, that was us. And like he works for the city, and he didn't even realize A, was a city engagement, B, that he was engaged around the climate change plan. He just did a fun escape room, and he thought it was cool. And so looking for those innovative partnerships, looking for those alliances that you can create. I mean, at the end of the day, the Black Environmentalist Alliance was the result of that. A bunch of Black people got in a room together, had a conversation, and like now we are here today. And so it can often feel isolated, and it can often feel like we need to take the world on our shoulders, but I think always looking for partners and others to work with, and that doesn't always mean you need money. That doesn't always mean you need to be an expert, but as Zamani said, like, you get in where you fit in. There are so many opportunities to work with others in so many different spaces. I think it's really important. I just wanted to add one extra, actually, you know, I'll just stop there. That's good.
If you want to add something, or maybe at the end we'll circle back with you.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's been well answered, and there's actually some other questions in the queue, so I don't want to hold it up.
Okay, Kirk, do you want to go, or do we want to move to another question? Is that what you're suggesting?
Oh, yeah, if you want to go to another question is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Sure, we can do that. Okay, so another question. How do you hire more inclusively?
Okay, yeah, my mic's on. I'll start. There were some excellent answers in the poll, in the answers there, and I'll just enumerate a couple of them, but they're all in the best practices, and you can get the Canadian one with the energy equity framework. You can go to the States with the Northeastern Partnerships one, which is the NEAP one. CUSP has one as well. But basically it boils down to setting a company-wide target for all the population, setting a management target for representation, doing an assessment within to kind of find out what your skill set is and also what your distribution is, and get a sense of where people feel on the diversity scale in your company. When we start, because you need to have a baseline to say, this is where we are, because what's going to drive inclusive hiring is that it really works. And it's amazing. And as you track, hey, we hired more diversely, and guess what? We finished things faster, we finished things better, we collaborated faster, we had better engagement with the community because it reflected their community. All of those things you'll be able to track. When you get into the actual screening process, anonymized anti-bias candidate screening, going into different channels, and then having specific recruitment capacity building programs and streams, right? I'd like to say that there's one of the things that really works well is taking advantage of what other people have done in other sectors. Like, we are sadly late to the party on this. So if you look at construction, if you look at RealPAC, if you look at BOMA, if you look at the Architecture Society, if you look at the legal profession, if you look at accountants, and if you look at the analytics profession, they have done a really good job on diversity. And one of the things that we need to get wise to is, hey, what worked with you guys, and let's try and replicate it here. So, you know, ask around and talk to all of these great organizations, because they can lay it out for you.
Great. Anybody else? Zamani or Julius want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that I think a really important part of inclusive hiring is looking at organizational culture, and also as you said before, and I don't like to use the word sort of bias, but I think there's a lot that happens through the hiring process that automatically screens people out. And I think that there are ways in which we go about recruiting that automatically screens people out. And so if your job description is written in a way that it's not going to attract diverse candidates, it doesn't matter how inclusive your process is, like you're not going to get the people to apply. Understanding some of the things that we talked about earlier, like talking about the intersection of race and gender. Oftentimes, women and people of color will not apply for a job if they're not if they don't feel like they're 100% qualified. And so, identifying those things and making space for those people. You know, understanding, you know, who do you have at the table, who do you not have at the table, whether it's your panel, whether it's your organization itself. Because the other part of inclusive hiring is like, you know, you can set a target and hire a bunch of people, but then if your organization is not taking care of those people and is not inclusive of those people, they're just going to turn around and leave. And there's actually many documented studies around people being hired. The sort of the article that I've read a lot recently is the pet to threat phenomenon, where, you know, racialized women are hired, they're sort of celebrated when they come in, they start to try and make change and speak up for themselves, they're considered a threat, and then they're pushed out. And there's these cycles that happen. And so at the end of the day, like, you might look at it and be like, why don't we have any racialized people, when it's your organization that is creating the atmosphere that is either pushing racialized people out deliberately or pushing them out because they don't feel like they can exist within your organization. And so it's really important to look sort of under the hood when we're thinking about our organization, when we're thinking about our culture, we're thinking about who we are trying to bring to the table, but also like, how are we existing with those people at the table when we're doing hiring. Because if we're not even attracting those people to the table, like another example that I can use is that there's an organization that I had some contact with and conversations with, and they were like, well, nobody's applying to our jobs. Well, I mean, if no people are applying to your jobs, that's a clear data point, right? Like, that doesn't mean that nobody exists, because obviously you can look around and find these people in these organizations across the country, any place. If you have no people applying to your organization, like, you need to go and look in the mirror. Like, that does not start with the people who are not within your organization. What are you doing to make those people welcome? What are you doing to encourage those people to apply? What are you doing when they come to your organization, you get them inside? What are you doing to make them stay or make them feel included and welcome? And I think it's really easy to sort of fall back on the, well, there's nobody exists, it's a pipeline problem. There is no pipeline problem. The problem is within the hiring. The problem is within your organizational culture. And so people need to take a step back and really think about those things. If your organization is 90% white, 100% white, 80% white, like, that's not a coincidence. Like, you're the one who are hiring the people. You're the ones who are finding these people. And so if your organization finds yourself in that position, then, like, you need to take a look in the mirror and review why that is. And that starts before the person even applies for the job. And so that's a really important part of hiring more inclusively.
Yeah, thanks for touching on that, and just highlighting that there's two sides to that coin, right? And it's the culture piece is so important, and about how to exactly what you said, create the environment. Once you are able to bring in those people from those identified communities into your organization, how do you support them? So important, so important. Thank you. Zamani, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, actually, Julia so eloquently stole my thunder, because I was going to talk about culture. Because I've actually been the person who has applied when a company does make those provisions on the application itself, but then got into the company and I wasn't supported. So it's critical. Yeah.
Okay. And just to close, I'm going to have one real rapid fire question. First thought that comes to your mind really quick on the last question from one of our attendees, but I think we kind of touched on it, but we'll take one more kick at the can. How can non-racialized people make room for others to be successful in the conservation field? Just first thing that comes to mind, quick answer.
Get up out of your chair and sit aside, and then ask them to move into that chair and decide what to do.
Julius or Kurt?
I'm gonna steal the words of Saba Khan, one of the co-founders of Eco Muslims, and say pass the mic, sort of similar to what Zamani was saying, but it doesn't always have to be you. And so you can help it be somebody else. So just decenter yourself and pass the mic.
Okay, Kirk?
All right. I would say that really quickly, understand what value that non-homogeneous views bring, and do the homework to understand things like the 4 different kinds of racism, the 4 levels of cultural intelligence, and understand those, and don't be put off when someone raises it in a assessment or in a program design conversation, because it deserves to be in the room, right? And if you don't have the expertise in that, allow people with the lived experience to share that with you and listen to them. Give them, as the slide says, give them the voice, even if it's contrary. Be equitable in how you assign opportunities and hire. And lastly, put them into the decision-making process. Bake in a diversity and anti-racism element into your evaluation criteria. And you'll see how very quickly you'll be able to get new voices on the table, because you're gonna wanna make the best decision possible to get the best possible bonus and outcomes.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, we are at time. So unfortunately, this conversation, I think we could have another hour, especially to answer all the questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them. But we did just want to say, thank you for joining us and participating in this important discussion today. We'd also, as a member of BEA, like to thank our organizing committee, Latornell, and I'd also like to thank my co-members of BEA. And just to wrap up, just want to highlight again that the BEA seeks to support and elevate Black people in the environmental profession, provide a safe space for peer-to-peer engagement, to have real conversations and share our experiences, and advocate for the Black community and environmental justice. So we do have a call to action, and I'm wondering if we can throw up, yep, there we go, thank you very much. Just wanted to highlight that we love to hear from you, engage with you one-on-one, and so our call to action is to sign up and to join the mailing list. You can put your email in the chat and we'll collect those emails and be sure to reach out, or you can reach out to us and get in touch with our emails that are on the screen. And just want to leave you with the final thought that to hold on to, that we will only grow stronger if we are together. And I think this conversation hopefully really highlighted it. It highlighted it for me. And just want to thank you all. Our website is www.bealliance.ca, or you can find us on LinkedIn to join our community. And you can also please send us jobs to our BEA hired job board, where we do our best to collect and share jobs that are being advertised in the environmental field. And just want to say be safe and enjoy the rest of the Latornell webinars. And we hope to join you for more conversations in the future. So thank you to our panelists and to the attendees for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jamie.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm just like, my head is vibrating from all of the things that I wanted to that I learned, and that I wanted to kind of just like think about and talk about. But so I personally thank you to all of the speakers for everything that you shared with us. I am kind of a newer manager, and I will be doing some hiring in the upcoming future, or the near future. So this is, your comments about hiring and looking carefully at the process and the, I guess, places where I can try and be careful to insert some inclusivity and diversity. And, you know, like working for the Ontario Public Service, we have certain metrics and we have measures to bring inclusivity and diversity, but I'm very curious to kind of going through the process to see what those actually look like and think about what you guys have shared today. And I think the other thing that I really found very apparent was just like the actual, you know, the concept of emotional labor. And I understand that. And I've read about it and I've learned about it and I've talked about it, but I can see that kind of through what you guys were talking about. And so I want to thank you for kind of doing that. And it makes me realize that, you know, every bit of this kind of movement and this work takes that kind of energy and that emotional labor. So, you know, many hands make light work. And if, you know, everyone kind of does just a little bit to sort of bring things up, like speak up when you notice stuff, you know, then I think that it makes it just kind of move forward and it makes things easier. And then the last thing is kind of when you talked about reimagining conservation, I think that is actually really what we want to do with this whole entire, like all our programming this fall is think about what do we even mean by the term conservation? So Julius, your points about like, when we think about conservation, are we thinking about like our cities and our communities and neighborhoods? And so, yeah, thank you so much for all of that as well. So thank you to the entire Black Environmentalist Alliance for partnering with us on this important webinar. Thank you to Shannon and Samani, Kirk and Julius for, you know, giving us a peek into your journeys and sharing your ideas and how we can do this work and we can support each other and advance Black professionals. And thank you to the participants for spending your morning with us and for your thoughtful questions. We really hope you gained some takeaways that you can apply in your personal life and in your professional life as well. And this webinar has been brought to you by the Latornell Conservation Symposium Steering Committee in partnership with the Black Environmental Alliance. So thank you so much to our steering committee members, especially Nikisha Mohammed, who really pulled this webinar together like a pro. Jane Lewington of Conservation Ontario, Lorian Farrell and Jonathan Fletcher of the Black Environmentalist Alliance, Jan Ivey of the Grand River Conservation Authority, and Katrina Furlanetto of Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, and Mario Maye of Allset Inc. So this recording of the webinar will be distributed by email to everyone who registered, and it will be posted also on our website and on our YouTube channel. So please share it with your networks. I think it will continue to be relevant for a long time going forward. And also, I just want to plug our upcoming webinar in early November, Healing Our Connection to Water and Place Through Habitat Creation. And that'll be on Wednesday, November 9th, and registration will open in early October, so stay tuned. And if you aren't on our mailing list, then sign up for our mailing list. We have newsletters that come out regularly at www.latornell.ca, and you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And one last thing is that we have a closing poll. We just want to find out some feedback on how this webinar went for you. So please just participate in our poll before you sign off. And that's it. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Bye.